Hi, I'm Fanny, and this is MYMP News.
Today we're with
Rekia Jibrin.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing today?
Sure, I came to speak about how to think about violence in school for the Scholarly Voices speaker series. And would you like me to talk to you about what I talked about? And I basically said that the way we think about violence and violence prevention is limited, and it doesn't factor, it sort of takes kids out of their context and the way they live and the experiences they have, and it really doesn't speak to the environmental and racial factors that impact young people's lives, and instead it focuses on changing young people's behaviors as the only component of preventing violence, which doesn't address racial oppression that happens in young people's lives and how that structures young people's lives.
We have a few questions.
So our first question is, what was your favorite dish as a child?
My favorite dish as a child was I'm not vegetarian, so it was a barbecued meat called suya that I used to have as a kid in northern Nigeria. I love meat. so yeah, so that was my favorite dish as a child.
Who has inspired you and how?
Who has inspired me and how? I think my father has inspired me. My father was and my grandparents, my father's family in particular. My father's inspired me to really think very deeply about the world, to question things about the world, and also to be fair in the world, you know, in how I read the world. He's taught me how to be a political woman, how to be a feminist woman. But I think my mother has been inspiring in that she's given me the voice that I have. My father's very quiet. My mother is pretty dynamic, and I think she's really inspired that in me. My grandparents have been extremely inspiring to me because they were very down-to-earth people who were farmers in northern Nigeria, and they welcomed a lot of different people of all races, of all religions. And so they've inspired me to think very deeply about how to live in a world with a lot of different people and how to actually value each other.
Next question. What do you see as the future for the African diaspora?
The future for the African diaspora. Well, I think that there's a lot of movement to come. I think people are going to keep moving, and our identities will become even more complex within the diaspora. Our cultures will be even more enriched within the diaspora. I think that just happens when people move around and travel and settle in new places and construct new communities. I think that there's a future in folks in the diaspora producing knowledge. You know, I think the education of folks and their access to education within the diaspora, so people coming from other countries in the diaspora to very privileged nations, I think that's being in solidarity with poor people in privileged nations, do you know what I'm saying? I think that sort of solidarity will produce knowledge that's beneficial to a lot of different people. And so I see the future of the diaspora producing knowledge that's vital to clearing up how history has been taught to us, but also to teaching us about how to see the world and understand the world in new ways.
When did you discover you were African?
When did I discover I was African? I discovered I was African growing up in Nigeria. I grew up in the north of Nigeria. My father is Hausa Nigerian by tribe. My mother is Indian. She moved to Nigeria to be a teacher. My whole family on my father's side are Muslim northern Nigerians, Hausa Nigerians, and so I think I knew I was African when I was growing up speaking a different language. And being around a lot of black people, that'll teach you you're an African. But when I migrated to the United States, I was 16, and I went from northern Nigeria to the Bronx. And I found out I was African when I was in the Bronx because of the way people interacted with me, you know, and the way I think our society constructs how black folks in America interact with African folks. And there was some tension initially, but that tension was because we didn't speak similar languages, right? Or we didn't understand how racial and economic oppression stands between us. And so I understood that I was African, you know, just from interacting with black and white folks, and Latino folks, and Asian folks, and Caribbean folks while I was in New York City. But I also understood more my Africanness within the diaspora once I started having abilities to communicate across those lines and to see across the obstacles of racial oppression that alienate all of us to think that we're distant from each other. We have a lot more experiences that are similar than different, really.
How has this topic of school violence influenced the choices that you've been making?
Yeah, well, it's influenced the way I value young people. It's influenced the way I teach and why I teach, and how my teaching has to really speak to oppression in the world, and have that be a sort of honest part of what I teach, the content of what I teach. School violence it's a heavy topic, so it's a difficult topic, but at the same time it has politicized me. It has made me more of a political person, and it has made me want to educate younger people to think in complex and political ways so that they can figure out how they're choosing to look at the world and not just consume it because they're being told what to think.
Do you think violence, whether it's in school or on the streets at home, do you think it would be that way if racism wasn't factored in?
If racism was not factored in terms of if racism did not exist, or if racism
wasn't a big part of violence?
So let me get your question straight. Do I think that violence
Would be the same one saying if racism wasn't a big factor, a big part, a big influence?
Okay, yeah, I think it would be different. I think that, because I believe that racism and race is what actually organizes violence in our communities, and the sort of violence of racial oppression is what organizes forms of exploitation that make us fight over resources, make us fight over just trying to protect ourselves, you know. I think that because race is such a fundamental part of understanding violence, that yeah, like if you took it out of the equation, violence would actually look very different, right? Violence that would mean that we wouldn't have a big prison system, right? If we took race out of that equation, I don't think we would be incarcerating people and young folks at the rate that we do in the United States. So race as an organizing principle of this question of violence is fundamental, you know? So I think it would have a big impact to take it out. Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.